Good afternoon and welcome to our webinar around assuring digital transformation project success. I'm just going to give people a minute or so. We've just started broadcasting, so what will happen now is that people will just drop into this call. So I'm just going to pop myself on mute and then we'll get started in a minute or so. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the webinar today hosted by Bloom Procurement Services. I am delighted today to be joined by a range of experts, both from within Bloom, but also from across the Bloom marketplace and some of the suppliers that we work really closely with on projects relating to digital transformation. I'm going to allow all of our panelists to introduce themselves before we get started. They're going to introduce themselves and also the organisations that they work for. And I'll start just by introducing myself. My name's Paul Mander. I'm Chief Procurement Officer here at Bloom. And I'm responsible for a lot of the work that we do around our partnerships. And I'm just going to pass over now to Dave Harters, who's going to introduce himself.
Good afternoon, I'm Dave Harters. I'm a category manager at Bloom, specifically looking after ICT. Work very closely with our supply base and our client base around developing specifications and supporting them through the sourcing event. My background, like a lot of people on the call, is I've worked in public sector for 20 years, both local authority and higher education, as an IT buyer, as an IT category manager, and in software asset licensing management as well. So quite a broad spectrum of experience before arriving at Bloom to work with the category management team.
Thank you, Dave. I'm just going to hand over to Steve Martinez from IMD Group.
Hi, thanks, Paul. So Steve Martinez, I'm a managing consultant at IMD Group. I'm also the capability lead for our business transformation capability. At IMD, we provide complex digital transformation across the secure and the public sector environments. We really put people first in all of the services that we provide. We were flexibly able to fill your capability gaps and also upskill your teams to ensure that that success is sustainable going forwards. Thanks.
Thank you, Steve. Just going to hand on to Deborah Feekins from Marlowe Consulting.
Hi, I'm Deborah Feekins. I'm a director of Marlowe Consulting, and we are a specialist business change organisation working across both public and private sector. And in partnership with our clients, we deliver large-scale, complex transformation, including digitally enabled change. And we build change capability with our clients, including leadership effectiveness and cultural change. But we also do a lot of assurance of major programs through reviews and reports. And we also offer skills training too. Our focus is on people to ensure that the migration and transition to digitally supported solutions is done practically, hopefully successfully, and most importantly, sustainably.
Fantastic, thank you, Deborah. And I'll just finally hand over to David Tidd, who can introduce himself, and also to Tony at Ernst & Young.
Hey, Paul, thank you. Yes, good afternoon. My name's David Tidd. I'm partner in our Ernst & Young. We're a professional services business. I think most people tend to think of us as accountants and tax specialists. That is a large part of our business, but a significant part is our consulting business. I'm a technology consultant, have been, I would say, a technology professional, have been for about 35 years. As a firm, I think to keep it simple, we're really privileged to work with all parts of government, departmental, local, as well as corporate sector, And when it comes to technology, I would say that the simplest thing we can say is that we help our clients to get the best from their investments in digital and technology. Did you want me to introduce Tony, or should I allow Tony to do it himself? He's got a great introduction, if you can just give him 30 seconds.
Fantastic. Yeah, thanks, David. Over to you, Tony.
Hi, I'm Tony Richards. I'm with Ernst & Young. I'm a technical director within the cyber practice. I've been with Ernst & Young now about a year, and prior jobs I've held, and I've been as the Chief Information Security Officer for the Youth Justice Board, which is a arm's length body from the Ministry of Justice. And I also spent several years as the head of security for the G Cloud and commercial programs at the Government Digital Service. So I've jumped on board to give my sort of experience and background around government, and especially moving into the digital transformation area.
That's great, Tony. Thank you. Just a couple of points really for anybody on the call today. We will be recording today's webinar, but also there's an opportunity for Q&A. So the plan will be that we're going to talk through kind of some of the common themes that we've picked up as organisations working in this space. But if you do have any specific questions that arise as part of our discussion that you want answering, please do feel free to raise those online. You can do that in the chat Q&A box. If you've got a specific individual that you'd like to answer that question, then please do just stick either their initials or their name in front, and I will direct that question at that point in proceedings. But we are going to run through some questions with an opportunity for Q&A at the end. The intention is to wrap up by 3 o'clock today. And if there is any kind of requirement to follow up, then what we'll do, if we don't get a chance to answer all the questions, is we will respond accordingly to all those that have registered for today's webinar. So just by way of a short introduction, I think we're all very aware that public sector organisations are dealing with very challenging times right now. And actually, you know, even ourselves being based in Gateshead in the northeast have been put under some more stringent lockdown measures only this morning. So, you know, the pressure that puts on the public sector is significant. We all know now that the public sector has been forced to look at different ways of driving efficiency and explore cost-saving opportunities. And actually, the crisis that we've been through or going through really has really accelerated the need for digital transformation within the public sector. It probably felt like a bit of a medium-term goal at one point, but actually that's certainly become a very short-term requirement right now. So I think my first question really to the panel is, how do organisations ensure that they've got adequate digital infrastructure to deal with these challenges? I'm going to throw that over to Dave Harters initially, just for his views.
Thanks, Paul. A really critical question, I think, for me in terms of how public sector work within that digital infrastructure world. And from my perspective, I think ensuring that right infrastructure, and with particular inference towards connectivity, it can be really challenging, but it's going to be critical to the success of any transformative program of works which involves ICT as part of that delivery mechanism. The adoption of existing infrastructure, which should include looking at new and emerging technologies such as digital twins, RPA, and artificial intelligence, needs to be considered across the entire digital landscape if the public sector is to really make comprehensive use of the advantages and efficiencies that can be represented by a transformative program of works. That being said, existing infrastructure can lead to, or the review of existing infrastructure can lead to difficult decisions, and serious consideration needs to be given towards cloud solutions or virtual approaches, rather than just taking the approach of expanding and upgrading to realise the maximum benefits of new and emerging technology. And it really needs to sit at the heart of digital delivery and digital by default. Consideration should be given to ensuring that communication with each other in terms of the systems to fulfill the tasks and processes rapidly, and with any necessary analytical capabilities that are on board as well. I'm really sort of keen advocate of the Microsoft stack, as everyone probably at Bloom knows, and I think leveraging those stacks is really critical and can assist in developing the decision-making process with rich time-critical analytics as well.
Thanks, Dave. And Deborah, just to get kind of your views on this.
Yeah, thanks. Some great comments from Dave there. Obviously, getting the technical infrastructure in place for digital transformation is really important, but we also have to think about that people infrastructure. So the right skills in the right place at the right time and with the right leadership. And typically what we observe is that there are two types of skills that sort of pop up as a gap. One of those is just around that end user technical interface piece, but the other is around business change in the way that it gets delivered in the first place. And in the sort of new COVID-19 ways of working, we're asking people to pick up new skills to work with this new digital world, but they're also needing to learn perhaps new ways of working currently, so new behaviours or processes, and also that remote working technology as well. And in that mix, we've got to consider that our leaders need time to reflect and learn how to operate and lead in this sort of new environment, both as individuals as well as teams. And I think we really see there that there's a need for sort of robust business change support. From a skills infrastructure point of view, in terms of making sure that delivering our digital ambitions are realised, we really need to think that, you know, those digital skills are pretty scarce, and we've got this tsunami of digitally driven demands that could end up being quite overwhelming. And therefore, it is really important that organisations address their people infrastructure issues to close skill gaps for digital transformation. And by that, I mean things such as, you know, really planning transition to digital first learning strategies and cloud-based curricula, and embracing digital learning, utilising collaborative technologies and new platforms. And you know what? That really requires a new digital savvy L&D, learning and development design capability, which can also be quite scarce. We kind of need to move away a bit from the myth that because you're being trained digitally and online, that those systems are intuitive. Actually, we don't always see that. And so digital infrastructure must build in online user help for those learnings and those skills opportunity, and make sure that they're context sensitive during the training. And finally, I suppose really, you know, there's been a bit of a legacy of underinvestment, if I can say that, in sort of learning management systems. Well, if you want people to learn how to use and work in different ways with these new digital options, then you're going to need to think about how do you invest in that and make sure it's correct, and that you have an adequate bandwidth to deliver this interactive learning at volume, because it's not just the small numbers as we might have seen before. So let's move away from that kind of minimal viable product that we've seen and underinvestment for learning and development, and get it right to support a sort of a skills legacy, if you will, that is really sustainable for people to come back to again and again as they take on new digital ways of working.
And I think that's a really, really important point, actually, Deborah, that you make there about that kind of notion of a skills legacy, and actually something that it's very easy to do something and then forget about it. And actually, this is something that needs to be systemic in how we kind of move forward. Steve, just pass it over to you. Same question, really, around kind of adequate digital infrastructure. How do we deal with those sorts of challenges?
Yeah, thanks. I think, in some terms, moving on from Dave's points there about connectivity, etc., I think adequate is rarely about, you know, volume or quantity. It's more so, I think, about the security aspects that are going to be the limiting factor in a lot of cases. So actually understanding the confidentiality, the integrity and the availability of the system and the needs, that's what's going to need to be built into the requirements at the earliest stage possible. And so part of that is really getting to grips with the vision of who needs to access it, where do they need to access it, you know, what are the encryption requirements, etc., and any perhaps there's additional processes that users or administrators might have to follow to be able to use the system adequately. I mean, there's loads of standards and guidance and all this kind of area, but the key thing is being able to interpret what that says and actually what it means in your scenario, in your situation. It's interesting that in a lot of cases that increasing areas of confidentiality or integrity are going to kind of be a trade-off against the availability. So as you try and increase one, you're going to be in a bit of a conflict. So what we found at IMD is to ensure that you do the necessary analysis at the front end and use a risk balance case to to fully understand that against the organisation's risk appetite. Thanks.
Thanks, Steve. Really important points there. And David, just from an EY perspective, kind of your views around this.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. I've just noted three things down. As colleagues have been talking, some great points there, but I may overlap one or two. But three things I've written down. Firstly, look forward. Secondly, engage your staff. And thirdly, understand your customers. And let me just kind of spend a few moments explaining what that's about. So looking forward, I mean, let's be honest. The response to COVID-19 has, for many organisations, been a rush to home working. It hasn't been about transformation. But what it has proven is that the perceived barriers to transformation that might come from a more flexible workforce can be countered and dealt with. So in terms of look forward, what we really mean there is let's not continue to work as we do now and harvest the benefits that we have had, but let's start to look forward and think about the way in which we want to operate in future. So that really much is very much about business model. And I guess in kind of the modern kind of parlance, it's about designing a future operating model around the technology that enables you to operate better. So look forward. So as coming out of COVID-19 should not just be about sustaining the current types of work or having what some might describe as a hybrid. Engaging staff for us is front and foremost at the moment. In the UK, we've seen an uptick in retail sales, we've seen an uptick in hospitality, particularly in restaurants for obvious reasons, but we haven't seen a rush back to work. For our own experience has been that our offices are able to handle just 10% of the capacity they could before COVID-19. And of that 10% that's now available, only 60% of it is being taken up by our staff. So we are working very hard to understand our motivations for our staff and some of the fear, uncertainty and doubt that goes with that. And sort of talking to clients, we're hearing the same thing. So what's that got to do with digital infrastructure? Well, whatever we kind of come out of in future, it's not just about putting in place infrastructure to do the job and to operate the processes and support the workflow. It's also there to enable us to engage with staff, to foster community, to enable team working and collaboration, all those good things. And it will never be, in my opinion, a substitute for engagement, good kind of team engagement. But we may well have to get used to remodeling the way in which we do that. The third thing is around understanding our customers. As we come out of this, or citizens in many cases, but as we come out of COVID-19, it may well be that some of our customers and some of the stakeholders will want to operate differently, or they may want to revert to a greater extent to the way things were for them previously. And one of the greatest inhibitors or constraints to what we've seen in terms of flexible working has been that disconnect between suppliers and customers, the expectation that they'll have matched ways of working. And if I'm now going to just kind of shamelessly to steal a punchline from The Economist this week, the three things which they think are necessary to enable effective working in the digital and distributed world are better information, knowing what's working and what's not, which has never really been available because you've never put this to the test. It's about it's about having better connections between customers and stakeholders, so that matched expectation, and it's having the right infrastructure. And as I say, the right infrastructure is not just about getting the job done, it's also about supporting the well-being and the personal needs of our people.
Thank you, David. Really helpful, and actually leads really neatly onto thinking about what are the typical blocks that we're seeing in terms of new agile and digital systems implementation for clients. So I think, through Bloom, we're working with a number of public sector organisations on their digital transformation programs, working with some of the suppliers that we've got on this call, but also kind of broader than that within the Bloom marketplace. So really interested to hear the views of the panelists around that. And David, I might just throw straight back to you actually, just around those points that you made that came out of The Economist there, better information, better connections and the right infrastructure. Kind of, can you just elaborate on that, talk a little bit more about some of those typical blocks?
Yeah, I can talk about some of the blockers. So I think there's some kind of slightly tenuous links here. They're quite direct links actually between that. So first off, So when it comes to adopting say a digital infrastructure and digital ways of working, without a doubt, in our experience, it has always been the case that adoption is the biggest blocker. And there's plenty of research that sits behind this, but if you choose any source you like, you'll probably find that it will refer to the importance of adoption, and the fact that one point that we like to make is that it's okay to slam dunk the technology, but you will only achieve 20% of the benefits. Adoption comes from the other 80%. So it's very much about affecting change, and affecting change in a very diverse, significantly and diversely different way of operating presents with it additional challenges. And I'm not going to expand on that. I'm sure colleagues, given their backgrounds, will have some things to say about that. I think the second thing, and it partly comes around to adoption, and it's also about engaging people, but it's about imagination. And I think what we have seen in the past is that digital adoption has often fallen into the trap of trying to set out a way of working, setting out systems and solutions in the way that we always have. And what we would advocate is something which is much more akin to show, not tell, and do with, not do to. So when we talk about delivering agile solutions, PowerPoint is not a great media. Word documents are worse. That's not I'm not having a go at Microsoft here. I'm just saying that the physical media is a difficult way to do it. A better way of engaging people is through experimentation and co-developing solutions with them. And I think what we'll see and should see is that the emergence of massive availability of low-code solutions and the ability to turn around proof of concept prototypes, and for end users to take a hand in delivering solutions, is something that will help us to drive that forward, moving away from the kind of waterfall approach, the written requirement, through to one in which we can actually achieve a clear outcome through experimentation. And the third one is really obvious, and I think Deborah kind of gave a nod towards this earlier, but it's very much about engaging people who've done it before. Different ways of working, but quite often we find experimentation on projects time and time again. We have got masses of experience in the public sector. I don't mean EY, I mean collectively in the public sector. And sometimes it's just a case of applying the right people to the right initiatives. And sometimes that means actually doing fewer things and making them successful rather than to cover too many bases. I would like actually to also invite Tony to comment on some of the security related blockers that we might see, because this is fundamentally important to distributed ways of working in the post-COVID situation. So Tony, would you like to add to the points I've made there?
Yeah, sure. I mean, some of the areas that I think, well, a couple of things. One, that the current situation has proven that you can have majority of your workforce working remotely, and it's certainly brought to the front more collaborative ways of working, whether that's through using whiteboards and Teams or Microsoft or other similar systems, and that you can run a workshop or you can run an engagement process. As long as obviously from a security standpoint that those suppliers and those services have been assured and that they meet your minimum requirement or minimum need for the security of that aspect, that it can be done. I think some of the areas around security that certainly around the digital infrastructure is, and to be honest, it's not always necessarily security. Sometimes it's financial, because of when you're moving to OpEx or you're doing agile development projects. Sometimes traditional finance ways struggle with understanding, or you're not putting a business case for a fixed outcome. It can be a movable target, and organizations sometimes struggle with that change. And likewise in the security and the cyber front, trying to retrofit or security aspects to a project, or over sort of like match security from traditional standpoints when it's a more agile and dynamic system or project, you tend to get clashes. So it's really about organizations also understanding how security can fit in with those processes, and matches in. So, whether it's the adoption of DevSecOps or, more automation, they really have to be looked at, especially since, I think this last year has advanced so many things with so many people having to move to online systems. That a lot of this automation has to be brought in and to sort of match that sort of remoteness.
Thank you, Tony. Yeah, that's really helpful. And I think just linking that back to some of the points that you were raising, Deborah, around some of the kind of engagement and how that works and the skills that go along with that. Perhaps if you could give your kind of thoughts around this.
Sure. Yeah, no, some really good points. So actually, I think overall, organisations, whether they be local government or bigger departments that are looking to make some changes around digitalisation, need to think about increasing their capacity and their capability and resilience to change overall. And I think we see quite a lot of blocks which can start quite high up in the organisations. It's not anybody's fault, but sometimes the blocks really do start quite a long way up. So we sometimes see a lack of leadership appreciation of the demands of implementing a new digital system, and a lack of appreciation sometimes of the impact of that on their staff or on the end users, and sometimes even third parties. And so that need for them to really sponsor and lead by example on these changes sometimes has to be encouraged. And that's also can be, I think, a skills gap. So what we see is that there can be a lack of understanding of what business change actually is and how it can really help. And actually, what are the practical steps to include business change in your delivery approach for digital transformation programs? We go to organisations where there is no professional business change capability or capacity, or sometimes there's a bit of a mix and a match. So we really encourage organisations to take a look at that and make sure that there's time and adequate budget provision to build that in, if you like, early stages into those delivery approaches. And I completely echo what David said. That engagement of stakeholders is often underestimated. I mean, I've been places where they've done wonderful stakeholder maps, but actually the step of actually going out to meet, talk and engage with the stakeholders never somehow seem to follow through in quite the same enthusiasm actually getting everyone mapped out. And alongside that, it's very good to do lots of engagement, but you need to have a dedicated approach to thinking about how you'll do resistance management, and what does that mean, and how does that feed into the way that you're going to communicate and engage with people. And a further point that I think David just mentioned at the very end there, we see a block coming from the fact that well-being of staff and peers and colleagues can also be underestimated or overlooked, particularly at the moment. People are under a lot of pressure and are feeling quite stretched. So that's sort of one area. And then if you think particularly about the skills side, accessibility to learning management systems, whether that's a security problem or a equipment or connectivity problem, these things need to be properly addressed when you're setting up your skills and capability development. What are those learning preferences? What styles are you going to use in an environment where perhaps blended opportunities for learning are fewer and far between? How are you going to cope with disabilities through your learning options as well, and making sure there's a suitable sort of environment? And believe it or not, we deliver change and transformation with some people that haven't really got very much basic IT skills. That's not what they were brought in to do, but now they've got to work in a new way. So there needs to be an appreciation that those people need extra support and extra time to be able to come up to speed. Given that we have people that change roles quite often in public sector, there's a bit of a staff rotation or evolving, or there's an emergency that they need to go off and deal with, whether that be COVID-19 or Brexit, whatever. You need to build that into some kind of learning design and content, making sure that your curricula and your artifacts are meaningful and really relevant. So building in good case studies and making sure those are digital, if that's what you're training on, of course, so that people can really respond well to those new ways of learning online. Make sure your navigation is correct inside, and that changes to ways of working and behaviours are also built into that training. It's not just, this is how you're going to operate the new system. What does it mean to the way that I'm going to work? So that lack of preparation for assessment and attainment through the courses, that can often be a block as well. So we can't see how people are progressing through their training and how they're growing and perhaps passing stage gates or progress or whatever it is, but making sure that we've got something in play to make sure that that's tracked well. And finally, I think, don't underestimate that ongoing investment that is going to be required. So, it's easy to make digital changes, but it requires cost and effort and lead times to maintain and update the learning content over and over as you keep having wave upon wave of sort of evolution within the digital offer that comes out to people to work on. So there's just a few thoughts of mine.
Really helpful, Deborah. Thank you. And Steve, I'll pass over to you. I know you're working with a lot of different organisations and kind of have a lot of experience in this space, and probably have seen a lot of change over the last 6 months. So give us your kind of thoughts around the blocks.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. I'd say I pretty much echo everything that's been said so far, but one of the key things that we do recognise, one of the key blockers, is around the organisational readiness. So many organisations are really struggling or failing because of a siloed nature around the way they're structured or the networks they hold. So, likewise, where Deborah's kind of inferring to amazing stakeholder maps, but actually in reality, are those communications happening? Probably not. So it's something that you really need to keep driving forwards and ensure that you're consistently and constantly refreshing who your stakeholders are. That's not just internally, it's also externally. So what does your user need? What's your customer base? And they're all going to be providing that key feedback through to ensure that you're on the right track and what you're developing is of the right on the right target. So in terms of bringing the whole organization together, it needs to be a united front, and there needs to be the collective change and being able to adapt to drive the success that's needed. Further to that, I mean, it is echoing parts of what Deborah said in terms of understanding truly what the cultures are, the perceived values and the processes of the entirety of the team. And I think, organizations should be utilizing their workforce to help define what the future is more so. So what digital tools are needed based on what they think the future of the organization looks like. As I say, that I think the teams themselves are underutilized. So getting some of those good ideas and teasing them out is something that we can all assist with. Getting in amongst the team and bring out those key points. That's what's really going to drive the technology needs forwards, and they're the right technology needs that are sufficient and appropriate for the direction you're heading in. Thanks.
Thank you, Steve. Absolutely, and I'm just keen, really, from a Bloom perspective. I'll bring Dave in to talk a little bit about some of the blocks, sort of blocks that we've seen. So I'll hand over to you, Dave.
Thanks, Paul. I think the panel have raised some really interesting points, and I certainly echo from Deborah and from Steve's perspective around skills gap and the analysis of that, and trying to understand what that looks like from an organisational perspective. We see a lot of those kind of activities and parts of transformation projects really coming through strongly, and it's once that skills gap's in place, it's about actually utilising it and doing something meaningful with it. So I'll completely echo the points of the rest of the panel and to close that off.
Thank you, Dave. And I'm keen to explore a little bit now about kind of what, we've talked about skills gap, we've talked about the need to be very inclusive, but actually that kind of what effective transformational leadership looks like. I'll pass over to you, Steve, perhaps first, just to give your thoughts on that.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So okay, so leaders, that they need to identify what's necessary and what's needed to ensure that valuable buy-in at all of the levels throughout the organizations. One key way to do this is by creating a clear vision statement that you're able to build the trust on, to identify leaders at every level and the change agents that you need to drive this stuff forwards. I think there's clearly a need to show real commitment, and so that's overtly keeping that consistent message that's coherent with the vision that you're setting, and I think there's an element around, you know, being completely open and honest around when things go wrong, because I think that's, in the longer term, it's going to build the trust that you need, and further to that, it's about growing as an organisation and getting better. So really sponsoring a continuous improvement and a learning culture as part of the innovation and the approaches that you drive forward. You know, you're driving forwards what you see the organisation being like, and part of that, you know, the majority of that, as we've discussed already, is about the people you hold. So I think that those would be the key points from my perspective.
All make perfect sense, Steve. And I think, yeah, certainly things that that we've seen as an organisation when working on these sorts of programs, but also, you know, with in other areas as well, that kind of notion of being absolutely inclusive, that kind of commitment, senior buy-in, and actually the honesty that goes along with that, I think, to build trust within organisations. David, I'm keen to get your view from an EY perspective. Kind of, you're obviously working across a number of different areas of the public sector, and kind of keen to understand your thoughts.
Thank you. Yes, transformational leadership, huge topic, much written about, much spoken about. And very real for us. It's very much at the heart of how we develop our people. But I think probably what I would lead with is to say, you know, the reason for transformational leadership is because we operate in a complex world where we have to solve very large problems. And we often have to do that in very uncertain or ambiguous circumstances. So transformational leadership and what it brings is actually extremely important to this. The reason being that at the heart of transformational leadership, no matter where you look, which researchers, which kind of commentators on it, they all kind of lead on one thing, which is the importance of purpose. And I like to hang on to that as being one of the key tenets, because if we're dealing in a complexity and with ambiguity, we can't rely upon our leaders to be on top of everything, to know everything, and to direct everything. What we have to do is turn that around, ensure that our people understand where we're heading as an organisation, what we need to do in terms of the outcomes to serve citizens and customers. And we have to recognise that as transformational leaders, we have to provide the appropriate support to our people. And there's a couple of things which sit behind that. It isn't achieved overnight. There's lots of coaching and support that can be given. But if we're thinking about forming an organisation that is rooted in a clear and compelling purpose, it's really essential to have the people for whom that purpose resonates. In other words, attracting, retaining and developing people who have that shared purpose. And there's a rather nice TED talk by Simon Sinek, which I'd advise you to go and have a look at rather than reading a book. His book's fine. It's only 15 minutes, but what he talks about is that most organisations focus on what they do, how they do it, and they rarely get to why they do it. If you want to attract people that are going to be absolutely committed and have the beliefs which coincide with your own, you need to explain the why you do it. And the most successful organisations and influential organisations have that very clear sense of purpose. So I think I'd kind of go with that. I think the only other thing I would say is that it's not just about communicating the purpose, it's also connecting top to bottom, by which I mean the organisational purpose is something which attracts people, and it's something that people can hang on to. But actually it's also important for individuals within and teams within organisations to have a role purpose. In other words, to see how they can contribute to that purpose and to be able to adapt if things change. And then lastly, there's the personal purpose, which is, I guess, a bit more of a drill down, which is over, as an individual in an organisation, can I make a connection between what I do on a daily basis and what my organisation is trying to achieve? And I think the punchline is keep the purpose simple but very relevant. For EY, the purpose is building a better working world. So, you know, on a daily basis, I can ask myself the question, is what I'm doing today helping me to achieve that aim?
I think, thank you, David. And I think, that connectivity point is really, really important. We find that as an organisation, just like you've mentioned there, David, with EY. Deborah, I'm keen to bring you in on this question around effective leadership. Just welcome your kind of thoughts on that.
Yeah, thanks very much. I don't know if any of you have been to look at the IPA recently and their website, which we can all access. They have a model there called the 7 lenses of transformation, and they look through vision, which I know Steve mentioned, which is great. They also look at plan, design, and so on. But 2 key areas that they say are the successful elements of transformation is 1, leadership, and 2, people. What I find fascinating about the leadership piece is that we have to think about it more than just as an individual leader. We need to think about it as sort of operational business leadership teams, where they come together as a team. And actually, sometimes if we're delivering a transformation, we need to think about that program, perhaps, that is delivering that transformation. What is that leadership team doing, and how is it? And an effective leadership team, I think, really ensures that transformation is sustained and delivers clear and positive measurable business outcomes while maintaining that employee engagement that David was just talking about a moment ago. So leadership teams need to be clear and consistent on their team purpose, their priorities, and their capabilities, and work on their team effectiveness together to really gain the trust and the motivation of their employees right throughout that sort of life cycle of transformation. And I guess that as a team and as individuals, they need to demonstrate that they're competent, so they need to be equipped with the right tools and skills to deliver the change, and be motivated, I suppose, and prepared to develop those skills, knowledge and experience, particularly around the digital environment. They need to be credible. So actually we'd like them to be experienced in change and have an ability to pull on that back knowledge so that they can be effective and deliver against sort of defined business case and benefits case. And we want them to demonstrate some ownership as well of the improvements and the measures that are being taken. Of course, we want them to be confident. We'd like them to be highly articulate, because that really helps in terms of engaging their teams, their staff, their parties, all those stakeholders. That's really important. And we need them to be able to take decisions, because David said, this is a complex world. It's pretty tough. But at some point, somebody's got to make some decisions. So we want our leaders to be confident enough to do that, as well as setting those sort of high standards, which they hold themselves and others accountable. It was notable to me when I looked at the Windrush findings for the Home Office report for Windrush that was conducted by Wendy Williams and that was published earlier this year. And she came up with, for me anyway, a really relevant point that I wanted to share with this group. And that is, you must engage leaders experienced in transformation with proven people change implementation skills and dedicated time to lead the program, supported by a leadership development program with leadership behaviours and values made clear. So just to pull out from that, you need experienced people. You need to have them experience with managing people and those skills. They need to have implementation skills. They need to have dedicated time to lead that program, which we know everyone's under a lot of pressure. And then they need to be supported, whether that's by individual coaching or team effectiveness work through transformation. But we really need to help our leaders. And I don't think anyone is born an effective transformational leader. I think we just need to help everyone to think about what does it mean and how they're going to get those skills to be able to deliver in the way that we need them to.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. And I think that that idea of making sure that people have got dedicated time to be engaged in a program is absolutely at the heart of this. I'm going to now move. We're going to kind of talk a little bit finally around why digital transformation should be at the heart of the public sector's future plans. So I'm going to allow kind of everybody to just make some closing remarks kind of about what we've talked about today, but also at the heart of that kind of question. So David, I'll pass over to you first from EY's perspective.
Thank you. I've got a really kind of trite answer, which is, of course it should. And the reason I would say that is that I think what's been demonstrated in the public sector over the past few weeks is just what a remarkable job and what remarkable outcomes can be achieved And I can't help thinking, how much better that would be with the, effective application of technology. I mean, our public sector has built hospitals in weeks, it's fed vulnerable people overnight, and our police officers have avoided civil unrest in precarious situations. And they've had to do that with ad hoc use of data and systems. They've been supported by professional staff. And what they've done has been absolutely remarkable. And I just can't help thinking, if we kind of got over the idea that it's just technology, and actually it's not just technology, it's something that sits at the heart of the way in which we deliver services, we could create an even better public sector.
Thank you, David. And I think that's absolutely right. I think what has happened in a very, very short space of time has been nothing short of incredible. And I think lots of pragmatism from lots of individuals and organisations across the UK to really make that happen. Deborah, I'll pass across to you next, just to kind of give your kind of final thoughts too.
Yeah, so what is clear then is that our lives generally are becoming more digitised, and the public sector is working really hard to meet that and meet the needs of the people that it serves in the way that they want to now access and consume the services that they provide. But the volume and speed of change in workplaces and people's expectations of service is at the moment, I think, slightly outstripping the capacity of existing systems and ways of working, and it's creating a bit of an excess demand, if you like, both on and within organisations to sort of make those changes as soon as possible. So as much support needs to be given as possible to those that are delivering that. And it is essential in my mind that in the transition to digitalisation, organisations don't jeopardise the well-being of their employees, and they provide them with both the technical and operational skills that you'd expect, coupled with guidance and clarity and support through those changes, but they also protect and safeguard their colleagues and their peers and those that work around them, their physical and mental health, because it's a testing time.
And I'm really glad you mentioned that, Deborah, because I think, from a mental health point of view, I think, it's been a real challenge for lots of individuals at this time. And I think, particularly those that can be quite isolated anyway, and actually see work as almost that opportunity to be social. It's very, very difficult. Speaking personally, I found it actually quite refreshing to be able to be back in an office environment, albeit not in the same way that it was before. But that's not the same for everyone. And David, actually, you mentioned there some of the statistics from your point of view around take up of places within offices and actually what capacity you have as an organisation. Steve, I'm going to pass across to you for just some final thoughts from your point of view.
Yeah, thanks. So I think as David said, it's absolutely the right thing to do. People are ready for this. Generally speaking, I think in a lot of cases in our home lives and things like that, we're utilising digital means all the time, day in and day out. And sometimes when you step back into the working life, sometimes there can be that disparity between the two. So I think it's just advancing in the way that we do that, and that's got to be a good thing. I think that the other point is around, through all these changes, I think we're creating an adaptability and the resilience to change. It's only improving. So, when we're talking about the digital transformation, it's going to be an enduring journey a lot of the time, as we recognise that it's getting faster and faster as these things, the technology advances. So actually, we need to be able to deal with that and cope with that and develop means and ways to help us through these times. And I think that's the change in perspectives on these elements. And yeah, Deborah, I think you're absolutely right on your last point there in terms of the individual's mental health. We all need to be there to support each other through these times, and being able to recognize that, identify it where they're occurring before it gets too far down the road, and being further away from each other sometimes can slow these things down, but through these digital means we can be there to support each other. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. And I'm going to just before I kind of finalise kind of where we're at, I'm just going to pass over to Dave Harters. But I just while Dave's talking, and I'll kind of just give some thoughts myself. Just if anybody has any questions that they do want to raise to any of the panelists, then please do just pop that into the Q&A. Dave, I'll pass over to you.
Thanks, Paul. I echo the rest of colleagues on the calls. It is the right thing to do. And it's getting to the point where it's the right time for us to kind of maintain that level of as we move forward to whatever that new normal looks like. And to echo kind of what Steve and certainly what Deborah was discussing, I think there's a desire for that on-demand self-service function, and really a different model of service consumption that we've probably seen for many years in retail and hospitality, and I think that's becoming much more key to members of the public being able to access those key public services. And for me, to kind of close off certainly from my perspective, I think it's that change in focus, that digital transformation really needs to sit at the centre of not just the IT strategy, but it should be considered at a wider organisational strategic level as well, across the board.
Thank you, Dave, and absolutely. And I think, you know, from what we've heard today from all of our panelists, and I just want to thank you all for being involved today, and thank you all for joining, those that are on the line. I think what's been really clear from everything that people have said today is that we've got to make sure, or the public sector has to make sure, that it's got an effective digital infrastructure to operate in this environment. I think there's no getting away from that. Things are changing, the way we work is changing, and we all have to be mindful of that from a digital infrastructure resources perspective, but also some of the softer things that we may consider, like, you know, people's mental health and how the impact of being in a work environment. It's clear that we've got to implement systems that are going to start to deliver those core services remotely. Offering lots more self-service options for users is really, really important. But we've still got to be clear about kind of cybersecurity and everything around that. I'm going to just thank everybody on the panel. This will be available on demand, so if you're listening, thank you for picking this up. I have just jotted a couple of quick questions as we go into Q&A, and again, please feel free to drop those into the Q&A box on the Zoom call. Steve, a quick question for you. You talked about kind of engaging with staff in a transformation program environment. Just talk us quickly through kind of your approach to that, how you've seen that. I know Deborah mentioned it, and David also made some reference to some of the ways they do that. But Steve, from your perspective, what about engaging with staff on a transformation program? How do you go about that?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So I think, you know, the key thing is we've already recognised with any transformation endeavour, there's always going to be people issues, but inevitably they also require people solutions, to put it in that way. And you can't proceduralise your way through that. You can't create processes to be able to address those concerns. You know, they're probably quite deep-rooted concerns that are built into the culture of the way the organisation works and of those individuals themselves. So some of the things we've spoken about through the engagement and the communication methods, and indeed, like the leadership alongside that to provide that strong core of trust, because it's the trust which is going to be able to guide the organisation through this journey, even where there's levels of uncertainty and the roadmap isn't quite that clear as perhaps individuals within the organisation would prefer. So there's a bit of a balance there to understand. But I think some of the ways that that this can be dealt with is to communicate the readiness assessments. So that's something that we provide quite a lot for our clients, is to provide an organisational readiness assessment, which is not just a point in time. It's not a fixed thing. It's something that you should be reviewing as you go along that journey, because actually readiness is a scale, that there's going to be thresholds around it. And I like to relate it slightly to risk management in a way that you still need to consider, you know, the full organization, your users and your stakeholders, and it's going to feed back some information that's going to be both subjective and objective as well. And some of these areas, and you know, I know Deborah touched on this as well, was, you know, the capacity to fully understand what the change is and what needs to be done and the full requirements. There's also the perceived value around that. You know, are the right incentives available and the right training systems in place? That, you know, we've spoken about supporting each other. So are the support structures there and the systems in place that are necessary? I think that, you know, does the intended vision and the objectives that are being put in place and all the benefits that surround that, is that in line with the kind of cultural the culture and the values of the organization, and therefore are you able to match that up with commitment? So I think all of these things, it's, you know, that these stem part of that communication message, allow others within the organization to join the journey, be part of it, and really unite. And I guess to summarize that, in terms of the readiness, it's on that appetite for risk. You know, are we ready for that? Well, let's share with everyone what we think so far and get some feedback on that. So I think those are the really key aspects and some good approaches to take.
Thank you, Steve. Really, really helpful to get your thoughts on that particular challenge. Just a final thing, and this was one that actually I picked up from Dave earlier on, was just around smart cities, and something that kind of I've been involved in terms of clients that we've worked with, but also involved in different organisations developing different models. A notion of kind of digital twins, something that you mentioned, Dave. We welcome your kind of thoughts on that. How does that work? What is it? What does that mean for some of the people who might be listening?
Yeah, thanks, Pat. It's a really interesting topic, and digital twins isn't necessarily something that's relatively new. It's been around for a while. We've probably all seen it in F1, for example, when F1 teams will do stress testing and run a number of different analytics on cars and things like that. But for me, what we're really starting to see now with digital twinning in a local government perspective is the ability to provide a digital twin of a city, of a town, of a building block and things like that. And Singapore have got an excellent example of how they apply digital twinning to replicate Singapore. They start to look at things like daylight consumption, traffic management, car parking, and what I think will be really, what will start to come through really strong with that is around capacity planning and being able to implement and enact some of the COVID measures that are going to be in place around distance measuring and things like that, and really developing a better and stronger understanding of capacity planning. So I think digital twinning for me, wrapped into that smart city world, is going to be quite interesting and quite key as we move forward as well. But a really, really interesting concept that's got application across the board, but certainly from a local government perspective, I can see real application around some of the planning and contingent planning as well.
Fantastic, Dave. Thank you. And something that particularly interests me. So nice to finish on that one. But look, once again, thank you all for joining us. A really huge thank you to all our panelists, Dave, Steve, Deborah, David, and Tony, for joining us today. Really appreciate you being involved, and I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks very much. Thanks for today. Bye bye.
Thanks so much.